You're listening to the First Fight podcast, home of the people and stories behind the fight. I'm Jennifer Anderson, the host and creator. My goal is to give you a peek into the remarkable world of fighting and create a platform for fighters to tell their stories. In each episode of this series, a different fighter shares a transformative story of their first time. On today's episode, I talk with elite MMA coach Mark Henry. If you know anything about MMA, you've probably heard of his name. He is best known as being Frankie Edgar's boxing coach. He is my husband's coach, Caitlin Chukagian, Eddie Alvarez, Zabit, Timur. Whole slew of fighters have gotten the opportunity to learn from him, and he's an ex-pro boxer, and we sit down and we talk about his experience boxing, his stumbling into becoming a high-level MMA coach, and how he feels about coaching MMA as a career, as one of his careers. So enjoy. So on today's episode, I'm with the legendary Mark Henry. Being modest already, but I've been wanting to interview him for a while, ever since I heard your first story about the chicken parm incident. I always thought you'd be a good guest on this show. So you started out boxing. Were you just boxing in the military, or did you start before?
Yeah, I started boxing before in Elizabeth, PAL. Elizabeth was a really good hotbed for boxing. You know, when I was growing up, and you know, everybody was watching boxing on NBC Sports and Sugar Ray Leonard and Duran and Hearns. It was an amazing time for fighting. Yeah. So there was unlike today, there were so many gyms open. I don't even know if there's a gym open in Elizabeth now, but there were quite a few open. You know, you had your even choice to go to in Elizabeth, so pretty much I started in Elizabeth. Okay,
how old are you when you first started training?
I started around, I think, 8, and then I got like more serious as I got older, and then you can't compete as much when you're that young. So then I wound up in Elizabeth, where I became really serious. I had some amazing trainers, and and had some great people around me. That's why it's so weird now. Like, you see MMA guys holding pads for each other and stuff like that, to where, when I grew up in boxing, there were so many different trainers around. It was a really great time,
So you started so young. I'm guessing you fought pretty young too in boxing.
Yeah, I fought young. You really can't, you can go in the junior Olympics and stuff like that, but the more serious stuff is, when you're 17, you can go and think, I'm pretty sure 17, 18, I don't even remember, was when you could start competing in the Golden Gloves. And Jersey's awesome too. There was like fight nights every single week, so it was, like I said, it was a great time to box because you could do it often. I don't know if you could still do it now, but I know there were so many fights. I know New Jersey now you can, when the Golden Gloves are going on, or, there's so many. There's like every week, the tournament where there's a lot of different fights going on. So it's still kind of great when the Golden Gloves and stuff are going on.
Yeah. So do you remember that first time? How old were you when you first fought?
I remember that I don't remember when I first fought, but I remember one of my first fights, I think was at the Golden Gloves. And boxing isn't something that's a school sport, and not many people do. So when I fought, I had fought my first fight. They announced it, in my school, and like half my school showed up. So it was it was really great for me that my whole school was there, and and I did pretty good. And then the next week, my school announced it again, and I can remember there being what was that paper? It was an Elizabeth paper. Oh my goodness. I forget the name of it, but there was a paper that came out, said they pushed back my my fight, some fights, because I had a lot of people coming in from my school, to watch. So I had some great support, from my town and my school. So for me, it was a great time.
So were you really nervous considering there was so many people that wanted to watch you?
Yeah, I wasn't nervous about fighting at all, and the guy in front of me. I was just worried about being embarrassed, in front of my friends, and maybe there's a girl I had my eye on.
Yeah.
If I lost, there were my chances. So, but that was, just it's always, that's I think the more you're never afraid of the opponent, you're afraid of, your family and friends and the embarrassment a little bit if things don't go the way that you plan.
So how did it go?
I won. That second one I won. And I remember, too, there were some awesome fights then, too. I remember fighting in Newark. We used to fight outside. They'd set up the rings outside. So, I remember New Jersey was really awesome back in the 80s for fighting. And the state commission did an amazing job for kids. PALs, and I remember the Kurt Center was down in Elizabeth, and then we used to go down to Newark and spar all those guys. They'd come to us, we'd go to them. It was always great relationships too.
Yeah.
Unlike, it was weird for me to get an MMA and, figure out things, because in boxing, even though we knew we would possibly be fighting somebody, that we knew, we would still spar them because we knew it was the best sparring around, and we weren't afraid, what they saw. We just worried about getting better, and the coaches were really great in that aspect too, on just, wanting us to be better too. So we would always, wind up going to another gym where they'd come to us, and the coaches always had a great relationship with the gyms around them, which was great.
Yeah, it's a completely different culture, I would say, in MMA. So you ended up boxing in the military as well. Yeah. So how many fights did you have total?
I think close to 100 fights, about 100 fights, because in the military, too, I wanted to go in just to fight. I knew that Coach Adams was the Olympic coach. So I wanted to go into the military. A lot of guys in the military were ranked. I remember Ray Mercer, he had won the Olympics. He was really highly ranked, and, someone I looked up to. And when I signed pro, I wound up going to that gym, Triple Threat, where he was at. And so, I wanted to, mainly go into the military because they had such an incredible boxing program. One of the best in the world. Cuba probably being number one, and U.S. and Russia up there.
Okay. And then you got out of the military. Did you continue boxing after that?
Yeah, I signed pro with Triple Threat, and then I had a heart problem. I had WPW. It's Wolff Parkinson White syndrome. It's when you have two electrowaves heart, so I flatlined. I was fighting someone who we all know, and I'm friends with, Frank Savannah, and my heart went in the first round, and the ref knew me, and he's like, "Mark, why aren't you throwing punches?" But my heart was I was having kind of an attack. I would have, and I'm like, I'm fine, and I lost the decision, and then my heart was racing for the next 14 hours. Usually it would only last me 6 hours when I had an attack, but this one lasted me 14 hours. So my mother brought to me emergency care was like, "What are you doing here?" and called an ambulance, and then I got to Rawway Hospital, and I flatlined, and then they told me I needed open heart surgery. I didn't want open heart surgery. I was 21 at the time, or 22. I didn't want to have open heart surgery. So I took some medication. That didn't agree with my stomach too much. And then, I kind of stopped because another attack happened. It wasn't as bad. And so I stopped. And then a while after that, my father saw catheterization. And I wound up having catheterization a while after that, but at the time I just stopped because I didn't know if my heart was gonna, I was gonna have another episode.
Up until that point, did you know you had that heart problem?
Yeah, I know. I didn't know I had WPW. Nobody knew what it was. Yeah, in fact, it happened to me it would happen to me all the time when I was young. It would always happen when I'm running, or it would always trigger when I'm in a cold, like I'm doing something athletic when I'm in the cold. Mm-hmm. Happened to me when I was playing basketball for my school one time. Happened to me when I was jogging in the cold. Happened to me in the fight with Frank. It was in the, I believe it was in the, around the winter time, in a cold Dunn Arena in Elizabeth. It's a really huge gymnasium. The high school's there. So it would happen a lot and trigger then. But since I was young, it always happened. But I was stubborn. I would always finish my runs. So if I had another mile left, I would finish it, and then my heart would just, you would just feel it palpitating. Then when I got into the military, I remember basic training. It happened, and I begged the drill sergeant, don't tell anybody or they're going to kick me out. And he didn't. And then I think I was a year and a half, 2 years into the military, and it happened again. And they sent me to Fort Dix, and they gave me, they tested me for over 2 months and could not find out what it was wrong. And back then I was, in amazing shape, and they just couldn't figure anything out wrong with me. They did every test known, and they didn't find out till I flatlined. But I always had it when I was little, and they just couldn't figure out. This is back in I think when they figured out 89, 90. So I don't know if they didn't know what it was at the time, but then they figured out when I had, I guess a doctor was smart enough to know it was a WPW.
That's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So was it hard for you to stop competing at that time?
Yeah, it's when you're a fighter, I don't want to say boxer, when you're a fighter, it's just ingrained in you. I would always go back to the gym and start sparring and say I'm gonna, fight again. And I had to stop watching boxing for 2 years. For me, everybody's different, but for me, I just stopped watching boxing for 2 years, because maybe I'd see someone in a boxing match I knew I would do good against in sparring, and be like, dang, this guy's like, killing it, and I could, and I could do that, and I'd go right back to the gym on Monday, or you just miss it because you love it so much. It's just part of your nature, and it's like, I guess it's like being, an addict to something, but a horrible addict, like that just, you can't help yourself. So that's what it was like for me. So for me, I just stopped watching fighting for 2 years, and that's kind of what helped me out.
Well, it's a lifestyle too, and it's hard. I think once you're used to like pushing it in one thing, it's hard for you to be physical and not push yourself the same way anything you're doing. I don't even know how you regulate yourself so that you don't do too much.
Yeah, it's just the fun of it too, of hitting somebody.
Yeah.
Not being hit, and you just can't buy all the money in the world. Can't buy, someone getting knocked out or your arm being raised. There's no money in the world that could buy it. That's why for me too, with the guys fighting, I feel like at least part of me could still compete a little bit. You know what I'm saying? To where if you love competing, and you that's one of your biggest thrills is competing, then, like I said, money you can't buy, nothing could do it but to kind of be in it. So to, come out to 20,000 screaming fans at Madison Square Garden, going crazy, and, and you're in the corner on the apron, and the fans are going crazy. You can't even hear the person next to you. It's like a rush that, only that could suffice, and your hunger of wanting to compete or whatever,
So fast forward, you got started in coaching with Frankie by chance?
Yeah, by total chance. My son, my cousin is married to someone in Steve Rivera's family, so we know Steve very well. We're at different holidays together, our families, we knew each other well. So when my son, turned 7, of course, we're going to go to Steve's wrestling, elite wrestling in New Jersey. It's one of the best programs, on the whole East Coast. So I brought my son there, and, Frankie, Steve was Frankie's coach too, and I think Frankie just finished college. So he was going to the next phase of what he's going to do, and then, MMA came up, and he started training, and Steve asked me to hold pads for him, and I said, nah, no thanks, I just want to watch my son. And they asked a few more times. I'm like, nah, I just want to watch my son. And I was crazy. Like when my son would be sick, I would still go to Steve's and take notes and go home, and that's a true story, and go home and try to show my son when he felt better. So I'd buy, I had wrestling tapes, and so my son got a little more comfortable, and then Steve asked me to do it again one day, and I'm like, all right, what the heck? But meanwhile, I never held pads for anybody. Like I said, that was the difference in boxing and MMA. Like boxing, like there was always 5 coaches there that, would try to, help fighters out or be there. So, like I said, I see fighters holding pads for each other. I just never seen that before. So when Frankie wanted me to help, I'm like, man, this would be the first guy I ever hold pads for. Like, I never held a pad in my life, but I know mentally, what I think he should do. So, I can remember holding pads for him, and I thought he was amazing, and I remember telling Steve, man, well, it wasn't that he was just starting, so he wasn't so much knowledgeable, but his speed and his mindset, and you could tell he was a tough kid, and how he took things up. He was so coachable, So I remember telling Steve, man, whoever coaches this kid, I think he's going to do really well. And somehow, it wound up being me. And I remember too. It's funny because the fathers in wrestling, we were on the other side of all the kids wrestling, and my buddy was there. So the fathers were making fun of him, because he's just boxing for the first day. Every father wrestler is such a great athlete and such an amazing fighter.
Every man thinks they're an amazing fighter.
Yeah, until they're not hitting, until they don't realize the heavy bag hits back, or you can't just hit air forever. Actual men swing back. But I remember they were ribbing on Frankie a little bit, and then Steve asked me again. I wound up doing it again, and then the kid just like picked it up so easy. Like, Frankie was amazing, and anything he picks up, he picks it up easily, and then you see people looking at him like, holy cow, of how amazing he is.
So you never had any intentions of getting into coaching once you were done fighting?
No, I definitely didn't want to get an MMA. I knew nothing about it. I remember changing the channels. I see two guys on top of each other wrestling, and it was just boring for me and just not for me. I wanted no part of it at all, and I can remember and then I did Frankie, I would do Frankie like once a week, and then he fought Maynard, and then he lost, and then I got mad that he lost, and he got mad, and that's when the competitor comes in. I'm like, listen, have you ever heard of a wrestler that wrestled once, twice a week and won the nationals? You know what I'm saying? And he's like, no. I'm like, well, then we need to get together more. And so that Maynard fight, the first one, kind of triggered it, and we're like, let's hook up more, and I'll watch sparring and this and that. And then I remember watching these guys spar. Was insanity. They have small gloves. This is like in the beginning, like this is in I don't even know what year it was, but it was like in the beginning where everybody still had no idea what they were like. Nobody was using headgear. I'm like, what are you guys doing? They're using like small UFC gloves with the ridges in the hands, and 85ers are sparring 55ers, and 55ers are really 35ers, and I didn't know what I don't know what was going on, but I'm like, man, well, let's start wearing mouthpieces, let's wear headgear.
There was a moment where you're like, okay, let's do this for real now. And you're
after the Maynard fight, it was let's get a rematch. Let's kill this guy next time, and let's focus on getting really good, because I saw how great he was in such a short amount of time too, and then that was it. And then we started getting together more, started watching, started trying to make him do safer stuff. From when I first saw him sparring guys 85, trying to rip his head off, and he was still new to the game, and just in that aspect, like trying to get some sanity out of it, But also too, it was tough back in those days. Like you didn't have an abundance of sparring. MMA wasn't as popular as it is now, So sometimes you had to spar Nick Gatone, but Nick was always smart enough to know not to try to rip your head off, where other guys weren't like Nick and would try to rip your head off. When we fought bigger guys, at least wear 16-ounce gloves when you spar and stuff like that. So, it was just trying to figure out in the beginning. It just seemed like a whole crazy sport to me. And then I remember watching Frankie before a fight do jiu-jitsu with Ricardo, and I thought, wow, this is, if you didn't understand it if you're a striker, you saw it was boring. Now that didn't look boring to me anymore. Wow, that's almost a guillotine. Wow, that's almost a rear naked choke. Or wow, that's almost a heel hook. Now you start to see, instead of just seeing two guys lying on the ground, boring. Now it's, holy cow, he's almost getting to this submission or that. So then for myself, it became, exciting. And then I remember the last part where I knew I had to get more involved was I can remember Frankie was about to have a fight, and I said, "How was wrestling?" He had wrestling practice, and I said, "How was wrestling today?" I'm like, "Did you do wall work?" And he said, "Mark, think about it." He goes, "Are there walls in a wrestling match?" And I'm like, "Wow, there isn't." So like, when I think he's wrestling, I think he's doing wall work. I think he's doing combination to takedowns when there's no combinations to takedown wrestle. So I knew those gray areas, where I started to need to learn more to be, so I could help Frankie, because there was no gray area guy. There was the wrestling coach, there was the Muay Thai coach, but there was no gray area guy. And that gray area is where most of the important things happen in MMA. So I tried to learn it so I could help out Frankie more.
That's everything, I think. That's what's hard about MMA. I always struggled with that, but you look at like Mighty Mouse. He's so good at that in-between stuff, the transitions, and that's what comes along, I think, with the evolution of the sport, because in the beginning you could get away with not being good at that, Yeah. It blows my mind that you had no plans of getting into this, because you are so... I remember, I've been around good striking coaches, I would say, but I remember coming to Corey's first session with you, and my mind was blown. Like, it's just so... the way... you must be like this with everything you do, but the way you organize everything, it's like the Matrix. You're... with their codes, and I don't know of any other coach that's that meticulous about their striking.
Yeah, I just tried it too. For me, like when I did my son's football, I never played football, but I paid this really incredible offensive guru from Florida to come down and teach me, because I was gonna because I knew I wanted to come up with an offense for the kids, and I said, no one's doing everybody's doing like under center stuff and handoffs, but no one's doing a spread offense. So in college they were, so I'm like, what's off? And I was looking through all these different offenses of what I could teach the kids, and everybody did wing T, everybody did under center, all base handoff offenses. I'm like, you know what? Let me do a spread. No kids do spread, with motion and audibles and four guys going out for passes. I'm like, nobody does that, So, I brought a coach down to stay at my house for a week, and he taught me the whole spread offense. And I would buy his tapes, different series of like bubble screens to blocking schemes to, to flood zones, to deep passing, So I was like a maniac in learning that. And in regular season, we went 48-0. Like,
you are crazy. Yeah, so, I say that in a complimentary way, but there's a fine line between genius and crazy. So where do you draw, like you have a very specific style, I would say. How did you develop that? Was it just from your experience fighting, or once you got into coaching, did you really seek that out, and where did you get it from?
It was like three things. Like for one, I was like 100. I fought at 147, so I was like really skinny, 6'1", and really skinny. I didn't have much power, so I used my range and a lot of movement. So I was used to feints and movement, and things like that. And the second major thing would be Frankie. He was a 55er that we used to have to make him on the night of his fights or weigh-in drink and eat, because we didn't want to be embarrassed of him weighing 150 at 155, so it was the style, what Frankie had to do when you see guys like him going against Gray Maynard, who were just so much bigger than him, or Sean Shirk, they were just, way bigger. Like Frankie couldn't stand in front of them, wrestling either. Like, Gray was a lot bigger wrestler. So if they're clashing on wrestling, Gray's going to win. He's got more weight if you both have each other, in a clinch, or you're banging into each other. So I mostly came up with that style for Frankie, just to not get hit by bigger guys in front of him, to hit and not be hit. And it was more of a boxing style. Nobody was using that style back then. Nobody was feinting and angles and in and out. And I can remember Dana way back when, after Frankie fought maybe Shirk or somebody, say he's one of the best boxing he's seen in a long time, and then I remember somebody on one of the sites said, new style Frankie Edgar's creating. So, it was awesome seeing that stuff. And the third part was, I just love my guys. I don't want them to get hit.
Yeah.
I'd rather, I mean, it definitely happens, and I'd rather it not happen. So if you just keep going, bringing pressure and on a straight line and trying to, you hit me, I hit you, who knocks each other out first, that's just not for me. I've had guys who've had that style, and I just won't coach them if they don't want to try to use movement and angles and in and out and setups. Like, I just don't want to be there to see people get hurt. You know what I'm saying? That's just, I'd rather them not drool on their grandkids' head, when their kids are older. That's why with Corey, I thought it was, especially too, I was so excited with Corey because he was so coachable, and I wanted to do a light heavyweight that could fight like a 55er, and I think Corey does that, and he accomplished that. I've had guys at 185 that I've tried to make that, and they're like, no, that's not for me. And I figured the second round I'll rest the first minute, and then I'm like, there's no such thing as resting, and I think that's what helps out a guy too, a Corey's cardio, insane cardio. Like, he can handle that type of pace and that type of feints and movement and angles where, that's, makes him so difficult, because you got to deal with his striking, you got to deal with his incredible wrestling, you got to deal with his cardio, so it's just a lot to deal with. When you fight Corey, it's like, you're fighting a 55 or a 45er,
Yeah, there's definitely different paces for different weight classes.
Yeah,
typical
exactly.
anyways. But your style it's not something, especially now that you're at this level, you get a lot of fighters that want to train under you, I'm sure. Your style isn't something you can just pop in, pick up, take some things and go. Like, fighters have to really dedicate themselves to learning your way of doing things, because it's like a whole nother language, really.
Well, I think first with fighters too is that coaches just get way too much credit. If I think of a lot of guys, had Frankie, he would have won the title with them. I think if John Jones was in different camps, they would have won with him. I think Corey, if he was anywhere with his determination, I mean, you see Corey, I've never seen a fighter after a loss like Corey that, that's just puts me to shame and makes me embarrassed of myself, just because of the way he is, and his mindset is so strong, and he's like, I'm going to learn from this, and it makes me almost feel not worthy to train him, and because it's stuff that should be coming out of my mouth, and it's coming out of his mouth, But I think that coaches get way too much credit, for stuff. You can only go as far as your guy. I could have a Lamborghini, and you could have a Honda, and I could not give my Lamborghini too many oil changes like it should, or wash it. It could be a dirty mess. Where you're a Honda, you could treat it, meticulous and wash it every single day and wax it. Where my car is dented and looks like garbage, but I'm still going to beat you every single time. I'm a Lamborghini, you're a Honda. And that's the thing is, I think coaches sometimes just get way too much credit. It has so much to do, with the athlete in front of you.
Well, to finish up, what would you say, if you can pick, are your highest moment and your lowest moment as a coach?
I don't know. I used to have high moments, and sometimes the low moments just I don't even remember the high moments. Sadly, I guess I'm coming off a loss.
Yeah,
too.
I'm catching you at a bad time.
Yeah. So, it's just I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze sometimes. For me, and I love my guys, and I don't know.
No, that's why I do this, because fighting myself, it's such a heartbreaking thing to be a part of, but it's like you can't stop it either. Like I said, it's like life. Like, it's not always fair, you expect it to be fair. You put in the work, and as a coach too, a good coach, you care about your fighters, you have connections with them. So I'm sure it's really hard knowing exactly what they're putting into it and
Yeah,
not
not
getting the
just them.
results.
Not just them, but you, the
Yeah.
wives, the
Yeah.
kids. When I know that my fighters, they have the guys that I have are older now, some of them, and I know their kids are watching. You know, and after a loss, it's usually the first thing that goes into my mind is their kids, what they're thinking. I've been beyond blessed to have amazing guys and girls that fight, and we have the smallest gym. I don't want a lot of people because you can't. It's impossible, to train that many people. Even with us, we spar. I'm there for 20 rounds. I could just do everybody do their 4 rounds and I could be home fast. But I want to see each fighter spar, so I know them when we go into a fight. I want to be able to have codes, so I'm not yelling right hand, left hook, and but I've been blessed to have 2 UFC titles in our small little gym. But I think if I had 10 titles and those moments with 10 different people, or even one winning 3 titles, I don't think the excitement would match what happened last week. I just don't think 10 of them could equal the one loss. The one loss is 100 times worse than the 10 win. One loss. You know what I'm saying? So.
No, I get it. I was just listening to Frankie's podcast. We're talking about Frankie and his most recent loss. But he's talking about it. I don't know if you heard it, but it's true. It's nothing like a sport losing, and not to downgrade like death, but it's like a mourning almost after you lose. Like a piece of you kind of dies. It's just different.
Because any other sport, you get submitted in jiu-jitsu or in a wrestling match, you lose, or if it's the Chiefs, the Chiefs lose, I could blame it on the offensive line, 5 people. I could blame it on the cornerback who got toasted, or the safety who kept getting penalties. But in MMA, you can only blame one. Boxing, I'm going to say boxing or kickboxing or MMA, you can only blame it on one person, or they only talk about one person. Well, sometimes the coaches too, but mostly the person, because he's in there. And and when you lose a certain way, like it's just on yourself, the way the way that that you grade yourself. It's just, man, it just sucks. It's just, there's nothing more even when you go to sleep, that night you try to sleep and you wake up every 10 minutes, and when you wake up, you're like, something's wrong. Oh yeah, that,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes and there's only one thing to take that away, and it's like another win,
Yeah.
and that's it. You keep chasing that,
Which is, something that most people never get to experience. Either end of the spectrum, they'll never understand the high and the low of it. But the hard thing about fighting, I think, to justify is that it just takes one punch. Sometimes it's random. It's chaos, It's creating random collisions, and it's not always the best man who wins, which is hard to accept as a logical person.
I think that's the worst of it, when you know that your fighter's better. Like when someone's a lot better than you, you know what I'm saying? Or they're well known, you know what I'm saying? And everybody thinks they're this killer. Like, something close, let me think, would be maybe like Caitlin and Valentina. Like everybody know Valentina is just a murderer, you know what I'm saying? She's like, she basically beat Nunes. Some people think she beat Nunes, you know what I'm saying? So, when you fight her and you're Caitlin, most people expected Caitlin, when you're fighting this phenom. So even a decent fight is a great fight, for you. But you know what I'm saying? But there's people that Caitlin's fought who I thought she should have crushed, and she loses, and those are the ones that hurt, So when she loses to Valentina, okay, could accept that. But when she loses to someone I think she's better than, then there's just no worse feeling in the world. You know what I'm saying? That's when, especially as a coach, you start questioning yourself and saying, okay, well, she's better than that person. It's your fault. You know what I'm saying? Like, like after someone loses, like I don't want to train anybody. Like I'm like, it's all my fault. I don't want to mess up the next person. So.
Yes, Mark is unlike some coaches I've seen where you take on too much responsibility. You care, and the fighters appreciate it, and they know that they never blame you. That's for sure. But they know it's on them. Everyone's done what they needed to do to prepare. That's never the issue.
I don't know. Always the first things too. It's the worst too because we're so code based. Mm-hmm. After every single fight for me, it's I should have called this. Oh, I should have called that. Oh, you know what I'm saying. Oh, like this past fight. Oh, because we're in range all the time and movement. Maybe we should have done that. But this opponent definitely called for bringing pressure. You know what I'm saying? To where you just it's so hard. It's so much easier after the fight to say, especially with, what do they call them? Couch, I don't know what they call them.
Armchair.
Yeah, armchair. Yeah, armchair quarterbacks to say what somebody should have, would have, could have, done as game planning or whatnot, and
they could never understand. And once you're in there, it's a whole different world. It's just completely different than the practice room. You can be prepared. It's not the same. And I struggled with that, the performing aspect of it. Some people it comes really natural too, but it's totally different. It's a whole nother world, which is why I'm kind of so preoccupied with this, hearing other people's experiences, I guess. Yeah. But I appreciate you coming on the show. You've obviously changed the game in fighting on accident. But I'll be looking forward to, all your fighters. You guys have an amazing team, and we'll continue to find success, I'm sure.
Yep, and like I said, I'm so blessed, that my guys have and gals have, chosen me for some reason. Somehow God has joined us together that I could even be a part, of their lives and get to know their kids and your kids and CJ and Corey. And like it's one of the most amazing things when you have like this young big mouth stud come to you, who's young and he's on the dating scene and he's out there, and then you see him marry an amazing woman, and you see him go from dating to marriage to their first kid to now their second kid. It's so special, and I think those are the moments that I'll cherish as opposed to the fighting moments. I can remember even talking to Greg Jackson one time and saying like, man, like this is years ago, not even recent. I'm like, dude, what are we doing? Like, I feel like a drug dealer. Like, I feel like getting these kids into something that they shouldn't be in when you see some of these knockouts and what it could do to them, down the line, I feel dirty about it, and, but, those moments of having barbecues at your house, or going to church together, the movies together, out to eat together, and meeting those families and, talking about God and Jesus to other people. And I think those are the moments that, that make you, for me anyway, keep going on and striving, for that little glimmer of when the hand gets raised, and how amazing, that is when not the win, but the families being so excited and happy.
No, and before you said, like, you don't know if it's worth it sometimes, but all those things, the relationships you build in those moments, I think make it worth it in the long run. Thanks again, Mark, for taking the time to sit down and chat with me. I've been wanting to get this interview for a while, and Mark is a very busy man between owning his family pizza restaurant, Pino's, with his wife, and coaching some of the most elite fighters around. Mark is constantly on the go, so I appreciate him taking the time. I really enjoyed our talk, and I've been wanting to pick his brain for a while. He's striking genius. So thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for listening again. We'll have more episodes coming up with some more living legends and giving you the stories and the people behind the fight. You can go to our website, First Fight podcast.com to look at any old episodes, and you can listen to all our new episodes on any podcast listening platform. Please follow us on Instagram at The First Fight. Share, comment, interact with us. Help me grow this project. Thanks again.